What's happening, my reef brother, Mark Vanderwall?
How's it going, man?
I am chomping at the bit for today's reef therapy session topic because it's something that I'm very, very diligent about. I would say my entire reef aquarium experience is characterized by how diligent I am about aquarium maintenance. So I think we do have a little bit of reef chatting, some lighthearted reef chatting, and then we'll dive into our main topic because we have a lot to get through. So there's a couple things you want to tell us about your tank, right?
Sure, yeah. Before we started recording, I was about to say, I'm eating crow a little bit on coral feeding, because I've tinkered with coral feeding and was like, okay, yeah, and then it would go away, like I'd stop doing it. And I just never really saw much benefit in my tanks, but um, I went, if I think the one thing about you and me is that we can have a strong opinion about something, but we're always second guessing that opinion and challenging that opinion internally, and we're welcoming of having our minds changed, right? Anyway, just for giggles, I brought in some corals that I don't typically keep that I think are very easy to feed, right? So you're talking about your micromusas, a lobo. Trying to think of what else I've been tinkering, but nevertheless, I started to just do a little bit of sustained feeding in a separate in my little quarantine tank. And
Mm-hmm.
okay, yeah, with the micromusas, it's hard to. I'm not doing a defined experiment, right, where I have a baseline or what do you call it, a constant in an experiment, where you have a coral where you're not feeding and you're
Control.
control. That's the word I'm looking for. I don't have a control, but just observationally speaking, that those corals do seem to grow better and faster, with some direct feeding. And I don't think that they won't, sustain in a nice reef tank without, I think they do fine without feeding in a tank, right? And I think that's sort of the camp I was always in, is like, I'm just adding more nutrients, and the corals do fine on fish poop and water nutrients and photosynthesis through their, zooxanthellae and all that. But it's just an interesting experiment where I was like, okay, I can see where this is beneficial, and it's also kind of addictive if you have it in a setup where it's easy to do it. Like I don't want on my big reef. I don't want to call me lazy, but I don't want to always have to turn off pumps and spot feed. I don't want to do the broadcast feeding thing, but in like a little tank where you can just kind of get a pipette in there really easy, it is kind of fun, So eating crow on that a little bit, like I can see that. I don't think it's necessary, but I definitely think it's hugely beneficial for certain corals.
Have
I'm
you
still,
tried the
yeah.
Brightwell Aquatics Reef Frenzy LP pellet?
No, I have the fauna marine ones.
So yeah, Funamarin, I don't know why their pellets are like more expensive than drugs. Like it's just really, really expensive. I get it that it's cold processed and extruded and highest quality ingredients, but man, they're smoking that crack for $25 for a little jar of pellets. So yeah, I was really excited when Brightwell Aquatics released their LP pellet. It's big enough that you can actually break it up. I don't feed my LPS nearly as much as I used to, as far as like target feeding, by my anemones for sure. That's a really cool pellet because it's a little bit larger and it sinks quickly, and it just lands quickly in the anemone and it closes up, and it's perfect. It's awesome for that purpose.
I think I'll have to try those. I think the big question mark I still have is, and maybe some skepticism is, soft corals that have small polyps, SBS, like Montiperas and stuff. I've tinkered with them even a little bit, right? But I'm not really seeing the same kind of response or gains in that department, and so I don't know. I don't I don't want to go too far into that subject, but it's just those arms still have some question marks about, like, are they just sort of like Xenia, where they're not really trying to filter particulates, but they're trying to filter dissolved nutrients in the water, right, with those fans, or I don't know. The other one I was sort of eating crow on is, like, I was really pissed off at my Deltec skimmer. And I'm still not 100% happy with how it's performing, but skimming it wet and turning up that DC pump has made it perform better.
Oh, nice.
And I think the problem there is I have a deep sump, and my brain logically thinks in a deeper sump, you actually want to turn your pump down, but raise your water level so that it's less turbulent inside, but you get the foam at the right height. But I think that was going against me where it was caking up the walls, right, of the skimmer cup.
Right.
And stuff would make it into the cup, but once there was enough caking, right, game over. And the wiper was good for the, what do you call it, the neck, but it wasn't, the lid is caked too, and that just kind of kills the foam production. But if you skim it wet, it seems to kind of hold its own. Of course, your skimmate volume is higher, but it's also lighter, right? So it's like,
one little thing I'd like to mention about protein skimmer operation is I don't think there's ever been a set of instructions released by any protein skimmer manufacturer that will help you dial in your protein skimmer and your foam production in the way that is either wet or dry. And something that's really come to my attention as I've reviewed skimmers over the last 10 years. I mean, I don't think there's a skimmer I haven't used for a while over the last dozen years. Protein skimmers perform very differently here at elevation.
Oh, I bet. That's interesting.
The air is much thinner. And, you know, for a while there, I think it was the Nios that really started tipping me off to it, because they were just so loud, and they would overflow all the time. And other protein skimmers using the Eden pump. So Nios names theirs, I think the Viper, and Delua first AC Deluas, they were using a version of the Eden pump. And I found that all I needed to do was throttle that air. And, you know, that allowed the pump to really achieve a specific ratio between the air and water mixture. So that's something to consider at higher elevations. And I don't think you have to be too high. I mean, imagine pretty much all the protein skimmer manufacturers are doing their R&D close enough to sea level. But even if you're half a mile high, you know, the air density is so much thinner, and then a mile high and then 2 miles high, it's so much thinner that the pump will choke on air, and it won't get that nice balance. So, but besides that air-water mixture, you know, there's a continuum from really dry skimming to really wet skimming, and I've never seen any protein skimmer directions really give you something informative, right? They always kind of target that middle zone that's going to be safe for everybody. Operating a protein skimmer is a really nuanced thing. I don't want to compare it to being a race car driver, but for your tank, for your salinity, for your elevation and resulting air pressure, and then what you want to do, man, you really have to know that protein skimmer. So I understand people's preferences for one skimmer over another, for sure. And I think your experience with the Deltec kind of speaks volumes. You know, you're running a certain way, and I always think that if you're in a deeper sump, you're going to have less airflow due to the head pressure.
Yeah,
right.
And that's,
so it's something you have to fine tune.
You know, the thing about a turbulent skimmer is it's, and what I mean by turbulence is like when you're looking in the bubbles and it's just churning, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you get that to high enough up the neck, like I feel like you get into overflow zone where, you know, one little odd surfactant in your tank, right, a coral spawn or something, will just set it into overflow, and then you're dealing with a mess. So I've always been paranoid about that, and I thought, you know, the nice thing about a DC pump is you can turn that turbulence down, right, and just have a nice fine mix of bubbles, but it's just nice and stable. But I think that was my downfall, and once I made it turbulent, I mean, maybe now I'm sort of in the danger zone if my clam or something decides to spawn, that I, you know, end up with a mess the next day. But it does at least seem to be just consistent where I have...
It doesn't have a float switch, does it?
No.
See, I think that's a sin nowadays. If you have a, you know, DC powered protein skimmer, Reef octopus, now known as Octo, they've had that built in, and, you know, part of their protein skimmers for, I don't know, since 2015. And it's just a simple thing. It's just I mean, it can't even cost $1. At the manufacturing end, can't even cost $1 to just put a little, shut off switch that you can put in your skimmer cup that's going to automatically shut it off. Um, that's just such a simple thing. But yeah, for me, definitely the biggest benefit for the DC first is quiet,
Oh yeah.
much quieter. But then, especially if you enjoy tinkering with the protein skimmers, the interplay of pump speed, water level, and then air intake, all those three things will really kind of give you a really fine-tune the skimmer performance on your tank.
Yeah, it has the airflow bends into the water level meter so that
Mm-hmm.
if the water level gets too high, it chokes out the air intake. But the
Mm-hmm.
problem is with like surfactants and when your protein skimmer goes not nuts, technically your water level I don't think really goes up. It's just the foaminess, if that's
Yeah.
a word, goes up, right? So it doesn't really help you in those kind of moments. Like if you were to add, red slime remover, right? I mean, like
Mm-hmm.
we've all been there, and you open your skimmer wide open, right? But yet you're still overflowing because of
I don't
the
even try. I
yeah,
don't even try. Protein skimmers go off if I'm doing any kind of treatment, and I'll add separate air stones because I feel like, uh, you know, it's my understanding that compressed air from a air pump, which compresses air, is like diving deeper, right? You're going to have a lot more oxygen uh, dissolving into your water than a basically ambient pressure protein skimmer. And even you let it go 2 days without a skimmer, turn the skimmer as low as possible, choke the air as much as possible, you still get skimmer bubbles coming out the top or coming out the bottom. It's
oh yeah,
just you just have to write it out.
yeah. I just usually have it overflow into a bucket with the hose, and then I just keep emptying the bucket, and it's basically like I water change through the skimmer when I have done something like a red slime remover, and it
Yeah, a
works.
nice little concentrated water change.
Or when you're using putty, right? Same thing. The epoxy stuff will sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, those are the two things where I was like, all right, maybe I spoke too soon on those two matters. But it's just, I've gotten away without feeding for so long that I was like, why bother? And then there's so many corals where I still don't really fully understand, or I don't think anybody fully understands what a sinularia eats, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, for some groups of corals, let's say, just to pick some extremes, like a really thin tissued Leptocerus, you can feed it. You can watch some of the food particles trail into the mouth, but the mouths might be, in the low light setting, they might be a few centimeters apart, and you're just like, man, there's not really that much food being pumped into the overall colony. But meanwhile, you want the juiciest zoanthids or just like the most luscious lord corals. Like a starving lord coral or one that's in decent conditions but not really being fed, and one that's in maybe low energy and being fed a lot. Those two corals look almost totally different. The huge trumpet-like polyps
yeah.
of lord corals. You can kind of tell, especially at the reef shows or certain shops, who's really diligently feeding their corals. And the thing is, you don't have to do it often. Even just like
Yeah.
once a week, the coral can hold on to a lot of nutrients and a lot of the nutrients from the food for a while that it's still kind of processing. So it doesn't even have to be that tedious. Like even if you like target fed certain corals once a month, that are photosynthetic corals. Definitely your NPS corals, they want to be fed all the time, all the
Yeah.
time if you want them really open. But yeah, that's the one of the funnest parts about corals is seeing how differently one coral can look from one tank to another. And so a little bit along those lines, right now, before I forget, I want to just let everybody know that first big reef aquarium event of the year is coming up, Reef Stock in Denver, March 5th and 6th. Reef Stock 2020 was like the last big event before our world got turned upside down, and so this is our first Reef Stock in almost 2 years, and we're like super excited. We got lots of great companies and products launching. I have a lot of help this year, so I want to be able to enjoy the show more than just running everything and kind of being scrambled. So if you want more information about Reef Stock, go to our website, reefstock.show in Denver, and then we'll have one in Australia as well later on this year.
Nice.
But along those lines of spreading corals out, yesterday, 2 days ago, I went to Aquatic Art with Chris Cap, and I took down kind of a yellow tentacled maroon Bernard Pora and a kind of blue stalked pink polyped and pink tentacled Goniopora to get fragged out. And that was so rewarding because I remember distinctively buying both of those as frags at Reef shows. And the pink one, I remember I just fell in love with it because it was subtle. It had kind of a lot of blue accents inside and just really bright pink polyps. There is nothing red about it. It is bright pinky pink. So I don't name corals. But when we have more than one running around and there's frags here and there, and I'm sharing them with someone, come up with the name. So I got this coral like 6 years ago. I've been growing it all this time. Finally came up with the name for it, Candy Floss, because it's like cotton candy, pink and blue. But cotton candy. There's so many corals named that. I always try to do something a little different. So I went to Chris Cap's. We hacked it all up. I have the main colony still. I have 2 new mother grow out pieces and then 3 frags, like large frags. When we cut frags, they're all like 2 inches by 1 inch. We were like joking when we did a whole video actually about fragging these corals. I took it over to his place because he had the XL version of the Griffin bandsaw. These corals
I saw
were
a video
2.
where you did with him on a orange bowerbanky.
That was 2 years ago. And at the end of that video, we're like, oh, let's do Goni next. I'm like, oh yeah, here we go. Here we are with Goni's next. But yeah, so now he has some, and he does really good on some of the lower light, lower energy stuff. And now I have several pieces that I can spray out through different tanks and share with some people. But it's a really beautiful, never red, pink Goni. Not like the pink, it's also like the metallic fluorescent pink, not the more pastel-y pink that you've seen certain strains come in recently. And so, it's just like incredibly rewarding to grow a frag to a point where it needs to be fragged. And now my colony, it's missing an inch off the bottom, but now I know that there's like 20 to 30 frags between what I have and what he has. And he told me he like gave a piece to every one of his employees. I believe that's what I understood. And it's just super cool to just like share that around. It's as pink as the maze balls is orange. It's really
I want
nice
a frag
coral.
of that. You sold me on it.
Oh no, it's really nice. So we got Reef stock coming up in 6 weeks or so. Again, that's in Denver. Did a video with Chris Cap, which we're still processing, on sharing the corals so we can see how that does in my highlight, low nutrient, high energy tank versus his lower light, lower energy, higher nutrient tank, and share some with you. And then finally got my hands on some like fish that are really special to me, and that was the Brazilian flameback angelfish that I rode up today. I think I got them on Monday of last week. And God, they just hit the ground awesome. 3 of them in a 10-gallon tank. And I just put 2 large resin decorations in there, kind of covered with like fake coral, so it looks kind of neat. And they just get along. A 10-gallon QT tank with Akamai KPS small water pump. I just bypassed the controller. That thing was always dumb. It's plugged in for constant flow. But yeah, I'm guessing that they must have been held in Brazil for a while because they're ready to eat and they're already begging for food just way early on. They weren't like fresh wild fish that somebody's played hot potatoes with. They were collected and they had some aquarium experience before they got here. And now they look amazing. I even turned a light on, put an extra light on them today to take some pictures, So it's like, that's really bright in their tank now. And they're just acting like good aquarium fish. And I have African flameback in my main fish display. And if you're looking carefully or casually, same fish. If you look carefully, you're like, all right, Brazilian flameback is a little bit larger, a little bit light bluer. The gold part is less orange, more yellow. There's more of it. It's got a blue tail. The profile's a little bit more rectangular versus kind of really rounded and oval shaped for the African flameback. And those are the kind of nuances that just really tickle my like fish fancy.
Have you decided where you're going to put them? Because I know you're hesitant to put them in a coral tank, right? Or no?
I have 2 tanks that are candidates. So the mangrove tank, It spends a lot of time with daylight lighting. I think that'd be awesome for them.
That would be a cool tank, yeah.
Or the tank next to it, my kitchen sink aquarium, where just not really a rhyme or reason. There's just all just different kinds of corals, which, so right now, currently the mangrove is filled with all soft corals and leather corals, which if they picked on, I really wouldn't care.
Yeah.
And then the other tank has so many different corals that almost certainly they will find something that they like. But yeah, I'm leaning towards the mangrove tank, because if they're doing well in a 10-gallon tank, I think they'll do awesome in this 2-foot shallow lagoon cube. And that tank, mostly it's just that tank is in under daylight spectrum so much longer. I'll really appreciate the full appearance of those fish. But yeah, it's just really nice to get them. And I've been, it's weird. It's like they're rarer than so many of the so-called rare fish, like koi scopus tanks. Those things are so common now, but you still can't touch one for 500, 800, 1200 plus, and way more if they're very fancy and showy. But I haven't seen Brazilian flamebacks in years. It used to be an African flameback, maybe it'll cost you $40, $50, and then Brazilian flameback maybe $60 to $80. But now the Brazilian flamebacks should retail for maybe like $150 to $200, but they're way more rare than so many of these hype fish. And yeah, they just tickle my fancy. I'm really glad I have them.
I always thought it was funny, like Mauritian fish, the gem tanks would always command a high price, but in the same shipment, if you got some of the Mauritian tiger tail coral beauties, they were like reasonable, right? And I'm like, well, it's the same shipment. And how often do you see the Mauritian strain of coral beauties around, right? Like a good one with a good tiger pattern. Every online retailer right now has gem tanks. And I think Live Aquarius said they were from Madagascar, which I don't know the backstory on that, but they're everywhere. I mean, but they're still $800.
Well, so gem tangs were always rare in Mauritius. So I literally went out to Mauritius back in 2013. We went on a dive and found 2. They told me that was very unusual. We found 2 small ones, no big ones. And in Madagascar, they are the zebrasoma.
Yeah.
Right, they are the dominant zebrasoma in that area. That's why they can find occasional zebrasoma scopus hybrids, which are super neat. But yeah, it's kind of cool. They're also finding the tiger tail coral beauties over there, and then some deep water forms in Madagascar and tiger angelfish. Yeah, Madagascar was a honeypot of exotic fish that we just never had a clue. I just remember today that they found a Debelius angelfish in Madagascar a couple years ago at 50 feet.
Wow.
A big one. It was almost too big. It was overgrown. It looked like a giant damselfish, just blue damselfish with a yellow tail. That was the sad part, right? We've been looking at all these really curated images of Debelius angels in books throughout the years. And then they find this big adult one in Madagascar, and I'm like, I know what it is. I know how special it is. But if you put that in a lineup of pygmy angelfish, it would be kind of towards the bottom of fish you'd want to actually keep.
That's like
that was interesting.
I always thought the Interruptus juvies were amazing, but as they get a little older, they fade a little bit. It's like
they fade a lot.
Yeah,
they fade a lot. Except when you have like a full blown nuptial male, they get like this crazy blue pattern on their face. But they're like 6 inches at that point.
Yeah,
like a full
they're
grown.
big.
So yeah, I think the last thing before we jump into our topic is I'm super looking forward to some fish from Papua New Guinea. They're getting, it's almost like the whole catalog of Indo-Pacific clownfish strains. So not the Pacific, not the Indian Ocean, but Indo-Pacific species. Oh my goodness. Black and regular Clark eyes, black and kind of yellow accented saddlebacks. They're finding all kinds of maroons that have this like almost lightning pattern on one of their bars. They're not crazy like the ones we've seen in the past, but man, if Matt Peterson had access to what they're catching now to cross with the original lightning, I wonder if the lightning strain would have been even more like a stronger phenotype of that particular strain. I don't know, but epaulet sharks, and I think they're just getting started. They're going to do corals there too, and so this is going to be super exciting. And here's another thing that's a super pet peeve of mine. People always say, you know, buy captive bred or buy farm corals and fish, and that's cutting out the people who live on the reef. And so one thing that Golden Ocean, the company that's operating in Papua New Guinea, dude, they were employing so many people. When you buy Papua New Guinea fish, that money is going to the people that live on the reef, and it's, you know, keeping them from resorting to more destructive exploitation jobs, right? Whether it's food fish or mining the reef or creating lime for beetle nut by burning coral into kalkwasser. It's crazy. So I'm sure we'll have a little bit more to say about that, but I think it's time to jump into our main topic. Don't you think?
Yeah, let's talk about some maintenance.
Oh
Such
boy.
you know, it's funny because it's such an important topic. I mean, in my opinion, you know, what kind of skimmer you choose or anything like that is almost less important than your level of maintenance, right? In terms of having a healthy tank. So, yeah.
I just want to set up a scenario. You've carefully selected your equipment. You found a perfect place for it in your house. You created the rockscape of your dreams. You've been growing out your own corals or acquired the corals and fish that you know have always wanted or wanted to grow out the most. And you've, you know, after a couple of years, you know, everything's grown to the size that's really appreciable, looks amazing. You spent years, you know, maintaining your chemistry, your nutrients, you know, keeping everything in check. And then one day, one little thing like a broken heater or a broken pump or just any number of things could fail, and within a matter of a couple hours to a couple days, you could be you won't lose it all, but like in most cases, like you could be set back almost to zero, not in terms of population, but in terms of just like starting over with your fish or your corals or having to flush whatever out. Man, everybody knows the old adage that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? And I mean, my reef keeping style is like maintenance first, then husbandry second. You know, it's like, and overarching, I would say everything on my tanks gets, in some ways, like reinstalled about once a year. What I mean is, you know, whatever product, maybe except for the lights, right? Because lights, they can pretty much coast, especially if you're not in a super dusty place. And now we're not replacing bulbs and lamps and ballasts and stuff, at least, so we'll kind of coast forever. But like everything else gets inspected and turned over. And when I leave town, like I don't even give it a thought that something would go wrong here, because I can count on one hand the number of small issues we've experienced in about 3.5 years.
Yeah, I think, personally speaking, the worst catastrophe I had, knock on wood, let's not tease Murphy here, was a heater failure. And it wasn't that the heater died and I had a temperature issue. It was that the wire actually disconnected from the heating element and was bare copper wire with electricity going through it, sticking in my sump, right? Doing, I guess, an electrolysis.
The copper directly into the water.
Yeah, pure electrolysis, right? With salt
I had
water.
a Gen 1 Coralia do the same thing, and what was crazy is I actually accused some roommates at the time of doing things they knew they shouldn't, and it was like months later I was cleaning this pump, and I found the culprit, and it was just like a copper bomb. Dude, you are you are done, man. You might save some things, right? You're not saving the reef, and it might be like a kind of a slow decline, but man, we have everything that has a moving part is going to wear out, and if you don't service it in some way, shape, or form, you're inviting a higher chance of failure on that product. And I think we can actually start from the top on some slightly less obvious stuff that I think is super important part of reef aquarium maintenance, and that's keeping the glass clean. You know, for sure, we last session we talked about coasting. There's no problem with coasting, man. There's no, if you don't feel like cleaning a glass, maybe just clean the window. Just clean the little window so you can see inside. But the first thing I'll say is, get the right tools to clean the glass. That makes it so much easier.
Yeah.
One perfect example for me is I use a lot of Toonsy Care magnets, and they have kind of oh my god, what's it called? Fiberglass. I have a fiberglass reinforced plastic blade, and after about a year, I won't think that it's a year, but I'll be scrubbing the glass and I'll keep noticing that it's missing a spot, and it takes me a couple times to go back through, and I'm all like, how long has it been since I changed that blade? And I got a little pile of them. I'll go change the blade, and all of a sudden it's just like butter, just and I get that super easy clean. And when you have that experience of cleaning the glass, with one pass on how many sides you have, that's going to make it much more likely that you will keep that glass clean.
Yeah. And I like that they have the metal add-on, the metal blade add-on, which I do not recommend for ultra clear glass that you would see on like a water box or a Red Sea, because if you get any kind of side swipe action, like you're going to be in trouble. But for us regular glass users, like that thing is money. It just takes out coralline like no tomorrow. And
that's a really good point, though. You really want to keep the motion perpendicular to the blade. The other thing is, so it's not just the Toonsy Care magnet, but like every magnet is going to wear out. Not all of them are super replaceable, but the other ones that I use a lot are the flipper magnets, and they all have a metal blade. And I can get by a few times, kind of bending it back into shape and the proper angle. But man, when you replace that blade once a year, you're talking $10, less than $1 amortized per month. It's going to make the cleaning process so much better. And we worked so hard for these tanks, so show some pride in your aquarium. And wipe down the outside too. If you don't want to get a $70 squeegee vac that does like magic for removing the saltwater residue, a basic squeegee you can get one for, I don't know, $1 from the general store or dollar store, And I feel like it's super important to keep that glass clean, because it's going to help you, one, enjoy your tank a lot more, which means you'll pay a lot more attention. For sure, it's going to help with the spouse or partner approval of the aquarium. I know some people really have to lobby for that, if you can say. But here's the important part. It's going to help you catch problems, right? You are not going to catch the early signs of ick, fish aggression, through like torn fins or whatever.
Yeah.
Coral parasites, the tiny bites from acro-eating flatworms, or the general appearance of Tagastes red bugs. If you have cloudy glass, you need that crystal clear glass to really catch it, and even to catch it through the corner of your eye. Even if you clean your glass super well, that doesn't mean you have to sit there and like stare at it, right? But when you have super clean glass on both sides, most of the viewing panel, you're going to catch those early problems and be able to nip it in the bud before it spreads too far. And I feel like that's, it's about having pride in your work, but also being able to observe everything that's going on.
Well, and it's fundamental, right? We keep an aquarium so we can look at it or look through that glass and see the inhabitants that we're caring for. So you want the best picture, right?
Absolutely.
If you get lazy about the coralline near the substrate, or even in the corners where you got to be careful.
Totally fine.
Yeah, but I mean, you want to enjoy your tank, and there's nothing worse than like looking at a tank and seeing like a haze of algae on the front glass. It's a good indicator too. Like I think if you're going if you're going a week and your glass is still clean, then maybe you've got a nutrient deficiency, right? Like maybe you got to think about
for sure. For me, the sweet spot,
or dosing more nitrates. Or
I can get away with once a week.
Yeah,
but the sweet spot is twice a week. So it's like Monday and then like Thursday, Friday, and it'll be a light film. But because we do it, very diligently, we don't really have coralline buildup on the aquarium glass. And then that being said, once you've got a good algae scraper, and you replace the blades frequently, and a good squeegee for the outside, one simple long-handled scraper to get the edges and the corners, that part I'll do about once a month.
Yeah, my new tank has those armored seams, and it's great because I can just clean the corners with reckless abandon. And I just use the Tunzi scraper, and I just literally slide it into those bumpers, just go nuts. And
Dunk it, dunk, dunk, dunk.
yeah, and it's made me go, okay, well, it was nice from you don't accidentally mess up the silicone while you're cleaning, but knowing that you can just be a little rougher in those corners and get like just perfectly clean front display, like any future tank, if I were to custom order it, I would pay the nominal tiny fee to add those. So
I'm pretty confident that, except for like maybe aquascaping aquariums, you want ultimate clarity everywhere. In the future, every tank above a certain size, let's say 4 feet or something, it'll be armored seams all around. That's just going to be normal. You probably have to ask to not have them if you want to have that ultra clean museum, naturescape or whatever. But yeah, that's one of those little things. I'm like, you can tell that is going to be standard on tanks up to a certain size down the road for sure.
The only downside about them is that they themselves develop coralline, and that is visible. And so I've got like a rough brush sometimes that I'll clean that up, but I honestly just let that be. Like, it doesn't deter from my view. So
cool. I think we've said more than anyone has ever said about the benefits and importance of keeping the glass clean.
Well, what about the back glass? Like, that's always
I put that down as
Yeah.
totally optional. That is completely optional. I got some tanks where I used to really, really keep it clean, and others where I just let it become a starry night of those little white encrusters. That one's totally personal preference. Sometimes it really showcases your corals that have that stark black glass. And other times it's also super cool to have, coralline and just like a living layer populate the back glass that eventually becomes, corals and sponge and sea squirts. And for sure, if you have, lots of little fish, or even like schooling fish, they are much more likely to kind of school along that back glass when it's populated by a bunch of stuff, especially if it's a nice layer of coralline algae. My opinion, that's firmly personal preference. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I go back and forth. Sometimes I get back there with a paint scraper from Home Depot, where you can get like the replaceable razor blades and pop them in, and you can go to town and clear up that coralline. And I definitely love that look, but I also let it go sometimes. And I sort of like having that substrate in a way for, all the copepods and everything to go, like that's like their safe zone. And also like, we've got all these snails, right, that are cruising around the glass.
No,
I do.
No, we don't.
But, given the only thing I don't like about letting the coralline go buck wild back there is if you do a large water change and you're kind of busy for a while and then you refill it, and then a week later that exposed layer of coralline that was exposed to air kind of whitens out, and you can just tell where the water was dropped down to in your water change. So that's kind of one bummer about it.
I feel more strongly about keeping the return lines clean.
Yeah.
It's just too easy to pop them off, throw them in some acid, scrub them down. I mean, this is like a twice a year thing, while you're doing other stuff. But one thing that we do here pretty diligently, about once a month, is clean the overflow teeth.
Yeah, that's on my list.
Clean those overflow teeth. The Battle Corals Battle Brush. Oh my God, there's one end. It's like a really stiff brush. If you haven't heard about it, I did a whole little article on Reef Builders about it. But it's got one really narrow, super stiff bristle side. Perfect for getting there. We also might use like a dental pick or something to scrape off those teeth. So yeah, I feel way more strongly about keeping the overflow teeth clean, because as those overflow teeth get clogged, it's holding more water in your tank. That itself is not a problem. But I do use a stable water level as an indicator of how clean my return pump is. But more importantly, if you have, kind of a semi-dam in your filter teeth holding back the water, if you have a large surface area tank, when the power goes off, that's a lot more water that your sump is going to have to catch from that disconnected water flow. And just be in tune with your aquarium. Everything that could be cleaned should be cleaned. So that's how I feel about the back glass.
Too. Once they get clogged in certain areas, a little
That's a
bubble
good
algae
point.
grows in between certain teeth. you start to have channels where they're, and then you're like, what is that new noise? And then you clean your overflow teeth and it's back to quiet.
What's funny is I experienced that a lot more on my freshwater aquarium, my zebra pleco, angel, and discus tank. It's got those Malaysian trumpet snails. Despite my best efforts, I mean, they're way down from what they used to be. But they like a big one will get stuck in a tooth or two, and then you can hear like a dribble coming out of that overflow, and just like, what's that? Of course, it's a little trumpet snail, little bastard. All right, before we get into some obvious stuff, I'm going to talk about maintaining heaters. Did you see the couple sentences I wrote down on there?
Yeah, you have a really good point on this one.
So
I didn't think about it until you said it, and then it just is like one of those, duh. Anyway.
calcium carbonate dissolves in cold water. That's why there's no limestone below 4,000 meters. I think that's a carbonate compensation depth. And inversely, at high temperatures, calcium carbonate will precipitate. Well, if you don't have really great flow, or even if you do have great flow around your heater, over a long enough timeline, depending on what you're keeping your tank at and how concentrated the heating element is of your heater, it's going to calcify around that heater. And what happens? It's going to get hotter over time as it grows its own limestone blanket. And that's, I guarantee, like the kind of people who have heater failures, who never really notice this, they're not the kind of people to have noticed that there's a little pile of limestone, semicircles raining down from underneath their heater element. But over a long period of time, you never do anything in your heater. It's just like it's trying to heat your tank through the limestone, and it's just baking the internals and probably overheating the glass or whatever element you have. Probably less of an issue with titanium heating elements. But either way, you want everything operating nominally. And so, goodness gracious, man, once a year, pull your even every 2 years, just do it sometimes. my recommendation to people is like, if you can't remember the last time you did any maintenance, you need to do it. If you can at least remember when you did it, you might be good. But a heater, like once a year, every 2 years, turn it off, then pull it out and put it in some, little acid solution for 10 minutes. And you might not even have to scrub. It might all be gone. But you do not want to have a heater failure. We already talked about, the long tail of copper and heavy metal poisoning. I'll tell you what, man, a failed heater is just practically a reset for your entire reef tank. It is not a good time. I mean, if it fails off, awesome. If it fails on, it's going to cook everything. If it breaks and liberates its internals of all those, metal components, oh my goodness, you'd rather have your tank cooked at 100 degrees than poisoned with metal. For sure. I'll take that 5 times over poisoned once, because at least you can restart right away. So yeah, a heater's a super easy thing. You're like, wait, there's no moving parts, but I mean, there is a little bit of, a thermostatic switch inside. Just pay attention to everything. And a heater is one of the most important things. When it fails, it can be a bad time. And all you gotta do is pull it out, stick in some acid for 5 minutes. You might not even have to scrub it, and then you won't have to worry about that for another year or 2 or 5.
Yeah, heaters, and I mean, I know we're going to talk about return pumps, so I don't want to go all in on it, but I think a lot of people don't clean heaters and return pumps because, if you take a heater out for 8 hours, you're going to have a problem, right? Or a return pump. But one, you should always have redundant return pump and heaters, right? That's in my book. Just
on hand.
Yeah, and I mean, me personally speaking, I like to use the same brand so that, and then make them as not hot swappable.
No, I got you. I'm following.
But swappable as possible, and one, it makes maintenance easier because I pull one out, put the backup in, and it becomes primary, and then I could just take my sweet time cleaning the other one when I get down to making a little citric acid bath down in the basement, whatever. And then once that guy's clean, he's on the shelf and he's now my backup. And then I tend to do that with my heaters and return pumps quite, I think I do it like every 6 to 8 months, It's probably I should do it more often, but
your heater or your return pump?
both. And
okay. That's a great tempo. That's a great tempo. That gives you some peace of mind. Anytime you leave, you're like, I recently cleaned that pump, probably 2 years ahead of schedule. I know it's fine for another two.
Yeah, I mean, I probably slip to a year sometimes, but at the end of the day, one, you have a backup. Two, you get to inspect these things, right? The ones that were in the
At your
running
leisure. Yeah, no,
at
that's
your
an awesome
leisure.
point.
And you don't. It's like, okay, if that heater's in a citric acid bath, and you go off to your kids, sport event on the weekend, and you forget about it, it's not like your tank's going to be 60 degrees or not 60 degrees, but room temperature when you get back, right? Like it's like you swapped it out. The only caveat there with heaters is you have to calibrate them. Like I like the Ebo heaters, and I can set two of them to 80 degrees, but they're going to set my tank at different temperatures, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Ebo is one that you can recalibrate. I use the John Lenn. It has a little calibration screw on the back of the external thermostat. But yeah,
and if you
that's
use
another
like
thing.
an Inkbird and you're using a titanium heater, it's even easier because the Inkbird you don't swap, right? And it's the controller, so you're just swapping out the heating element, and the Inkbird is the one that decides. I have that sitting on a shelf that I had running on an old tank, and I just haven't swapped over to it. But yeah.
Yeah, funny story. I got the BRS combo for the Shago heater with the Inkbird thermostat on my fish tank. It never turned on because I have a full-on cover covering the entire fish tank, so it doesn't evaporate much, so fish don't jump out, and it never turned on. So it's just like it's been in the tank for so long. I'm like, finally pulled it out because at the very most, I actually need to cool the tank a little bit in the summertime. So I'm looking forward to getting a little bit more of an open top. But yeah, I think we just said more about aquarium heater maintenance than anyone has ever said ever. And we'll continue that. I want to come back to the
Make that a
recalibration.
trend.
I want to come back to the recalibration of all devices, but I think one of the biggest meat and potatoes of aquarium maintenance is going to be pumps. And I'll say it again. If you have moving parts, just like your car, just like a cheese grater or a coffee grinder or anything that moves, like it needs to be serviced if you want it to last. Clean pumps are not only more efficient, meaning they pump more water, but it also means that they're going to run quieter. They're going to run cooler, precipitate less calcium, and they're going to last a lot longer. I'll tell you what, though. The peace of mind when you are away or out of town, knowing that you've serviced that pump within recent memory is going to be worth so much more. The chances of failure are still pretty low. But when you're out of town, you don't want to be thinking, oh, man, I wish I'd remembered to do that this last 3 calendar years. And another thing is I've seen hobbyists adding pumps to their tanks because their flow wasn't what they wanted to be, but the pumps that they had in there before were just they were like the matte glass we were talking about, just covered with like vermitids and sponges and coralline, and there's like pumps everywhere. I'm like, dude, clean your original pumps. I'm thinking of a particular hobbyist, but yeah, keeping those pumps clean is going to prevent you from having to add more pumps, right? And that was one of the silly things that I've seen happen a lot, where hobbyists, especially some of the cheaper pumps, I'll say this again, like G-Bows in the past had a reputation for being demagnetized. I know someone was really confused, but anything that can be magnetized can be demagnetized, and they lose power over time. But that's not what we're talking about. But a good quality water pump, we've talked about the Reef waves, right? The gyre turbine thing, dude. I get 6 weeks before I'm at like 50% of output, at 100%.
I love those, but I went back to Tunsies because of the ease of maintenance. Right?
I don't blame you.
I mean,
I don't blame you. I use the gyres on like a specific, mass water movement, water flow regime on a peninsula style tank. It totally works. It's not that big a deal to clean out the reef waves. I wish we didn't have to, but it's 6 weeks. We literally put a little, like paint marker thing on one edge of the tank so we know, and it's about 6 to 8 weeks. It goes from 100%. And you know how we gauge it? 2 ways. One, sound. First of all, and there's one in particular. We've tried all the bushing things. I know like people are like, oh, change the bushings or the bearings or whatever. I'm like, no, we've done all that stuff. But one of them will literally start the very slightest whine at 6 weeks. But we are intimately familiar, and by we I mean me and Evan, on how the reef waves are directed against the glass to really push the water all the way down to the end and back around, and we know exactly how big the wave should be coming out of the outflow, right on the edge of the tank. I even like drew it out one time. I just kind of outlined it, and we just watched it go down, 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 down week after week. So the gyro pumps, they're awesome, but I don't know. Maybe it's just like so many contacts, so many surfaces for contacts. At least two for each turbine. Not to mention what's happening inside the rotor, and all my biofilm will just cripple that thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten away with, putting them in a bucket and running them with citric acid and just letting them clean themselves, but eventually you got to get up in there and scrub stuff out. And
we do not see mineral buildup.
No, I get
No,
the little snails.
Are you using
in there.
Shires?
Yeah.
By max spec? Okay, so for us it's the Reef Wave. I have jump and max spec pumps in some other tanks, and those can actually run a lot longer, but it's just they're not like the primary pump, so those things can go down to 30%. They're actually pretty big pumps. But the Reef Wave, it's biofilm. It's totally biofilm.
Yeah, I never had that problem. I would get the those little 1 millimeter snails would get if you look at the turbine inside, right, it's kind of like fins, and they would get up in those fins and stuck in them, and that probably didn't, who knows how much of an impact that did, but it's like, running it in citric acid it's gonna take a long time for those little shells to dissolve out. So
do not try this at home, but we never use citric acid. We use sulfuric acid here.
Yeah, I'm done with. I tried the what's the stuff they sell at Home Depot? God, that stuff's brutal.
Muriatic.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
then
that's what we use. I'm sorry, not sulfuric. We use muriatic acid.
Oh, yeah.
No problem.
Hell no.
I mean, yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, we have a big open space. If we're gonna really work on something, we'll actually put it outside, and we're talking like 5, 10, 20 minutes max if something's incredibly calcified. But that way you don't have to wait. You don't have to like think about, I'm going to set this in the citric acid and then wait 3 weeks for XYZ to dissolve. And we'll take pumps off in place. I got all my cables really well managed, and I just put up a stool, bucket, put the pump in there, turn it on, run it, and then after it's done running for a little while, we'll just kind of maybe run it in some fresh water. But it's just acid, right? So it's not a big deal. Diluted acid, first of all. If you don't know what you're doing, do not do what we're talking about, first of all. May his rest be long and placid. That boy added water to the acid. That boy did what he oughter. He added acid to the water. Always add acid to the water. Just a little bit will go a long way. And yeah, we're never working with pure acid. That's super important. But yeah, if you're not comfortable with laboratory techniques of acids and bases, don't even try. Don't even think about it. Forget what I just said.
I had a 1 gallon of muriatic acid sitting on a steel shelf, and one of those kind of metro shelves, if you guys know what that is. Maybe you don't, but it's like one of those metal racks where you can adjust the shelving. But anyway, and it was near an aquarium in the unfinished part of my basement, and I just noticed that the whole shelf was just deteriorating with rust and just stuff, and I just kept assuming it was my tank, right, like salt spray. And then I finally put 2 and 2 together, that even though I had a cap on it, just the minute amount of gas escaping that bottle, it was all because the other side of the shelf was totally fine. It was just where that bottle was. I know citric acid has gotten a little more expensive with inflation and all that, but I just get it on Amazon. It's so much, it doesn't smell, it's not like, even vinegar to me, I hate the smell of vinegar, right? Like this stuff doesn't smell, it's easy, like if you've only got one tank, in your case where you're maintaining a crap ton of return pumps, right? And flow pumps.
I relish it.
Right, but
I
for somebody who has like one return pump and has a backup that they need to clean and swap out, like a little citric acid is so easy and so low risk to deal with. Like you can stick your hands in there and like it might irritate your hands like a little bit. I mean, it's still an acid, don't get me wrong, but you're not going to cause like, the fumes aren't going to piss off your wife or anything like that. So
right, no, it's better to be safe. So yeah, definitely your propeller pumps, your water movers, they, and I would say like Corellias and like those style of pumps. You've seen them like even the smaller tunesies rated like 3, 4, 5 watts. That's in like a vacuum. That's in like a laboratory settings with zero obstructions. The moment it creates a biofilm, or eventually also some calcification, you are losing so much performance, so much outflow. Your return pumps, centrifugal pumps, they have a lot more torque and power associated with them, so they are a lot more forgiving, and you're not going to lose nearly as much power. So I would say we clean our flow pumps, besides the Red Sea Reef Wave. That one's like every 6 weeks, like clockwork. I would say like Vortex and Neros, maybe every 3 to 6 months, depending on the tank. And the larger the pump, they have more tolerance for that. Obviously, the smaller pump, the smaller tolerance, the more a little bit of biofilm really affects them. But return pumps, it's once a year. And I really like to, for the return pumps, because they're so critical, it's like New Year. Beginning of the year, I want to know that I've, everything's had a once over in the previous 12 months. And so from December to January, I'm just really aiming to make sure every return pump's been taken apart and cleaned. And guess what? We do it often enough. I'm trying to think. The closed loop pumps, so the Vectra M2, the Seche 9.0, and the Aquabee Up 8000, those are pushing a ton of volumes in tanks with like a lot of detritus, a lot of funk in the water, a lot of life in the water on those tanks. Those need to be, those really need to be cleaned. But again, we're using those for flow. But like return pumps, I have Max Spec Jump, the Vectra L2, a Seche 7.0, another Vectra L1, and Deltec eFlow, and maybe a couple others. Those about once a year. And when we clean them, we first of all, we run them much lower than full power.
Yeah.
Like we almost nothing runs at full power here, except maybe for our flow pumps, not our return pumps. So we'll open this up, and it's just biofilm, not calcification. So maintenance is also like preventative. So running those pumps at slower speeds prevents them from getting hot, because you're not running them at their limit, and they'll have much, much, much less calcification.
Yeah.
That being said, the Vectra L1 on the quarantine system went like 2.5, almost 3 years without a cleaning, because when I installed it, I didn't put a union valve on it. And so one day I was working on the tank, and I went to turn it back on. I said, nope. Nope. And I'll stick my finger in the intake of the volute and try to push it, and it wouldn't move. So I had to like unscrew the volute, right? The volute was like, plumbed in. So I just unscrewed the pump from the volute and then clean it that way. That was poor planning, but I just didn't want to get a 2-inch union. I just didn't want to. So, you can get away with it for a long time, but goodness, you do not want that pump not to restart when you're not here, when you're not around.
And you mentioned the copper bomb. I mean, how many hobbyists have we known where it happened because of internal pump, right? So it's a good time to inspect, right? Like you clean it up, take a good look inside, just look at it, inspect it, look at the impeller, is there anything broken on the impeller? And then, you put it back in service, and you have that peace of mind that you're not going to...
You will see... Pumps are so good today. We're even like talking about some of these relic things about reef aquarium equipment that is much more rare. But certain pumps back in the day, one that came to mind was maybe something like the really older PSK or Seche pumps, the Vertex. What they call it? Was it just called the V6? And pumps in the back in the... I don't want to keep saying back in the day, but in history, certain pumps that really were AC powered, they would show swelling of the impeller or the impeller shaft long before it ever ruptured or corroded. And another thing that I do is, a lot of these internal water pumps have like a back plate on them. Always take the back plate off. I always take it off. Some of them are actually designed to pull water through to kind of cool the back, but I always pull the back plate off, because you can have cracking of the epoxy on that backside, and you might inspect your pump normally and just not realize that there's a whole nother face to the pump that is exposed to seawater.
used to do that with my Eheims. I'd pull the backs off.
Yeah, some of the older school pumps that are still being sold, still being made, around 20 something years. Yeah, they're the buildup of like heating, expanding and contracting was eventually going to cause some cracking to that epoxy.
Yep.
Anything else you want to comment on about like return pump maintenance?
No, I mean, like I said, it's obviously flow pumps definitely agree with you that you'll corals grow, reduce the ability for the flow to get to where it is, but a lot of times I think people blame flow issues to inadequate maintenance on their pumps. And again, I mean, I know I've said it before, but when you got like some spare cash laying around, pick up the exact return pump you already have and put it on a shelf and just swap them out from time to time. It makes the whole cleaning job, especially, and if you have like a union, right, like what you're talking about, like a quick disconnect, have the same one on the other one, so it's just a quick swap. I just can't emphasize, it kind of stings when you think about how expensive some of these pumps are. I mean, I'm sure somebody that has a gosh, what are those new pumps that are like $2,000? Yeah, that'd be a hard pill to swallow, to spend $2,000 and put something on a shelf, right? I don't use those pumps, but
I think you got it right though with the union, right?
yeah,
You don't have to replace the exact pump,
yeah,
but say you have an Abyss or Vectra or a Syncra, that's your main return pump. There is no shame in having a backup mag drive that you've outfitted with the same
yeah,
connectors for hot swappability. Just in that moment of desperation. You don't want to be stuck in local fish store owner's phone number late at night on Facebook or whatever, trying to get him to open the store and sell you a pump when you really need it. But yeah. Flow pumps, those are super important, obviously, for the health and long-term health of your tank. But return pumps, critical,
yeah.
absolutely critical. And so there's definitely different degrees of attention that needs to be paid regarding aquarium maintenance on different types of aquarium equipment. And I think the next one to really get into is protein skimmers. Now, I want to tell a little story. I think I've told it before on here, but I was supposed to give a talk at MACNO one year about aquarium maintenance. Like I said, this is a topic I take really seriously, really near and dear to my heart. And I started out the talk by, I'm thinking, people are semi-intelligent like me, and it's part of their routine to clean some of this stuff. And I was just asked the crowd, right? I polled, the listeners, how long has it been, how long has it been since you cleaned your protein skimmer? Raise your hand if it's been 3 months. No one. Raise your hand if it's been 6 months. Maybe one person. Raise your hand if it's been 1 year. Maybe two. Raise your hand if you've never cleaned your protein skimmer. Almost all the hands went up. And after the talk, I had to quickly pivot the entire kind of direction of the talk from how to do the maintenance to the importance of doing maintenance, like we're talking about now. And at the end of the talk, I had so many people come up to me and just like, I never knew to clean my Venturi aspirator valve for air to get through. I never knew to take my pump apart. And people always ask me how. I'm just like, start taking things apart and just remember how they go together. It's that simple. It's not like electronics where you can make a little mistake that's going to brick the whole thing. It's all fairly electromechanical. You just put it back the way it came. It was put together, and you should be good. And so for protein skimmers, again, that's not nearly as critical as a return pump, but we've all been there, and I've been there too, where you get a new skimmer, it's freaking rocking. And just without thinking about it, every couple of months you just raise that water level just a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then maybe 6, 9, 12 months down the road, you can't raise it no more. And then you're looking at your skimmer, you're like, man, that's not as cloudy as I remembered it. And people will think that their skimmer's broke or something. I'm like, it's broke because you let it get broke. It's not broken or damaged. It's just take it apart and clean it. You're going to have to turn that water level down. But especially with, we already talked about how the biofilm and the friction that creates is going to really reduce the flow speed of your impeller. but especially with needle wheels, that needle wheel impeller, when it's brand new, those sharp edges really help to break up the bubbles into more numerous and smaller bubbles. That is going to create the large surface area that you want. And then as it gets filled with biofilm, it softens those blades, those pins, and it's going to create larger and fewer bubbles, reducing the surface area, increasing that turbulence. And it's like magic, man. If you've had a skimmer a year and you've never cleaned it, clean it one time, and you're just going to be like, oh my God, I forgot how it's supposed to be.
I think most people who have had a skimmer a long time and have cleaned it have had that moment where they clean it, they throw it back in the sump, and they're like, holy hell. It's always
I was shopping
crazy.
for a new protein skimmer, and I didn't realize I just needed to clean it.
Yeah.
Just needed to clean it.
And I've been burned so many times by calcification in the air intake, and then you take it all apart, you get a little dental pick or something, and you scrape all of that out. Paper clip. Yeah.
I have a few paper clips running around just to. Actually, you know what? We don't even get to that point, because about once a month, I'll boil up a kettle of hot tap water, and we'll just run it through there. A few skimmers per kettle. I don't know, maybe like once a month, and it's also kind of preventative. Another thing that we'll do is when you turn off the air, your pump runs in such a way that it will, to some degree, eject a lot of particles and crud that's stuck in the impeller.
Yeah.
Right, because it's meeting with more resistance from the water that helps to flush it out. That's not going to really prolong the maintenance interval for a protein skimmer with a needle wheel, but it'll buy you something. And also those pins, man, there's all different kinds of needle wheel impellers. I've done some crazy stories, documenting needle wheel evolution over the last 15, 20 years.
Do you remember the mesh needle wheels? It was like a sponge or something on top.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
There's some pretty interesting designs that are still being put forward out of Asia. They're hybrid, and then they're like a needle wheel sandwich with like a little bit of mesh in the middle. But yeah, also, if it's been a long time and you have a lot of sand in your tank, or a lot of little snails that you're talking about, those little guys will get stuck in the impeller. And that's going to unbalance your impeller, causing more rubbing with the main body of the water pump, making it noisy, and it's going to help make it wear out quicker. So, man, this is one of those things that's just so important. Keep your skimmer clean. And then while you're at it, just clean up the body, because it looks cool. Just keep that body clean so it looks cool.
Yeah, and going back to what I said earlier about eating crow, I'm telling you, man, like if you're somewhat diligent about just keeping that skimmer cup and skimmer lid clean, you just are always going to have a much better long-term performance with that skimmer than if you, let's say, clean it. I mean, I remember long ago I finally got like a quality skimmer, and I reached out to the manufacturer and I was like, how often should I clean the cup out? And he was like, every 3 days, take it to your sink and clean it. And I think it was the ATB guys that told me that. I was like, that's crazy, man. Like I'm a once every week kind of guy.
I got a life.
Yeah, but they're not wrong, man. Because now I mean, I'm not perfect, right? Like I have busy weeks, but when it's just a normal week, man, I try to pop that thing off now every 3 days. I was hoping to get away with it with the Deltec, but I've started to do it on the Deltec as well. And maybe that's why I've always gotten away with smaller skimmers, because I've always thought the skimmer ratings were kind of nuts. But maybe just a smaller skimmer that you keep clean, beats the
not just the cup, but like top to bottom operation. Yeah, I mean,
it's like what you said about the pumps, right? If somebody puts like a 400-gallon skimmer on a 200-gallon tank and they're like, it's perfect, and it's like, but the guy cleans it once a year, it's like, yeah, you probably chose the right skimmer.
It's a really incredibly dynamic piece of equipment, and it's more critical to keep your return pumps clean, because that will lead to cascade reactions that will kill your tank. But when it comes to protein skimmer performance, don't talk to me about this or that skimmer if you're not a real regular cleaner, because you won't really know. Your skimmer performance degrades the moment you're done cleaning it and you put it back in your tank, like just like that. Just like that. All right, we've covered flow pumps, return pumps, protein skimmer pumps. Do we have those really well covered, Mark?
I think so.
All right, so next I would say is a little bit less critical and still kind of a newer thing because peristaltic dosing pumps are really new, but a really simple practice. In addition to making sure to replace your peristaltic tubing or just the dosing pump heads, depending on your model, is just once a year. Just pass a ton of fresh water through it, right? I know a lot of the additive makers are trying to make their solutions incredibly concentrated. And so if you have thin lines that, let's say, pass by a power supply, that heat, like we talked about earlier, can create calcification within the lines. So I've had this happen in various ways where a very concentrated solution, I don't remember whose additive it was, calcified inside the lines just because it was like right at that edge of being super saturated, and it just needed a tiny nudge to become calcified. And I don't know how long it had been since I cleaned it. It was really early days of dosing pumps. I want to say it was I think this company was called Coral Shot out of Poland or something, like way back. And yeah, you don't want to have calcification in your lines. Just run a bunch of hot fresh water, just like it was a protein skimmer, and then you won't have to worry about it probably for 2 years. But you do it once a year, you get that peace of mind, easy peasy. But especially with the continuous dosing pumps, something about that constant action really flattens down the peristaltic tubing a lot more than periodic dosing pumps that are just pulsing a little bit of additives into your tank.
Yeah, I've got a lot of peristaltic pumps because I use them for dosing. I use them for automated water exchange. I use them for auto top off as well. And the ones I'm mostly paranoid about are the ATOs, which are the SpectraPure dosers. And then I've got a dose that I do occasional water changes with. And if the tubing breaks on those, I could have a catastrophic issue. For example, my water exchange doser is one floor down from my tank. If the tubing cracks, I could have a continuous siphon, right? So, and I have some controls, because I don't do what some people do where they just do automated water changes just nonstop. What I do is I plan it for a 24-hour period, and I open up a valve on the RO type tubing, the Murloc tubing, whatever, and that way, even if a siphon was created, there's no pull because the valve's closed, right? But those things operate at a much higher frequency. Well, the water change goes very quickly, right? So it's a lot of abuse. And then the ATOs, that thing runs, I mean, how many times a day? I couldn't even begin to tell you. I hear it all the time, right? So those I'm mostly scared of failure on. So I have it on my calendar just once a year to swap out that tubing. And maybe I should do it more, but that's where I feel comfortable doing it. So those things are, people kind of treat them like set and forget, but they're not, right? Those dosers.
What is set and forget in a reef tank?
Nothing.
The stand and the glass tank.
Oh,
and
yeah,
I cannot think of another thing that doesn't need to be serviced.
It's funny though, we
bulkheads
used to have
bulkheads should be good for 10 to 15. If you got good quality bulkheads, I mean, if they crack, you replace them or whatever.
Yeah.
The only thing that's set and forget is your stand, maybe your sump, your tank, and your bulkheads, right? So if it's not part of that entourage, it needs some looking after.
Well, it's like the PVC piping, I mean, that'd be a pain in the butt to replace, but
we're going to get there.
Yeah,
we're going to get there. I got it on the list.
But
we got to flow. While we're still talking about the peristaltic pumps, though. You recalibrate them.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
as your tubing is getting flattened, and then you replace it, just recalibrate it. And the more often you do it, the more familiar you will be with it. You are not going to have to download the manual and find out how to recalibrate it. But if you're, a stickler for dosing and precise and accurate dosing, that starts with calibrating your pump. It's the easiest thing to do, especially, goodness, I mean, which pump doesn't do it? A Camware, Red Sea, Vectra, Sentia. Those are all it's like you can't even use them until you calibrate them.
I even had a really, it was a terrible unit because it had a weird bug in it, and apparently I could ship it and get a firmware update to fix it, but it was like an old school bubble magoo, but that even had calibration on it, right?
Dude, if you DIY'd a peristaltic pump with your own motor, peristaltic pump heads, and some basic programming, you could make the trashiest little dosing pump. It's super accurate if you recalibrate it all the time. But if you replace the tubing, you're going to want to recalibrate there. And something that's a little bit less often, but kind of in similar to what I was saying about the dosing lines, just running fresh water, just make sure to flush all that stuff off, is dosing containers. Just once a year, just flush it out, because those, like I said, a lot of companies are trying to get that super concentrated, almost super saturated the dosing solution, and you can get some crystals building up in the bottom of your dosing container. I think that's going to be really specific to your environmental conditions, like where you keep your dosing container. If it's a little bit warmer, it might tend to precipitate out a little bit more. So yeah, just once a year, super easy. Just clean it up. Clean it up.
The other thing I like about dosing containers that have measurements on them is, if you fill them up exactly the same all the time and you're checking to make sure that they're not empty, I check what levels they're at, right? Because, typically with an A-B solution, you dose equal parts. So it's sort of a nice quick check to make sure that your dosing heads, they may not be calibrated to the exact amount that you were wishing to dose, but at least they're calibrated against each other, right? So, a week in, the level in that dosing container should be drop in equal amounts on both sides, and that gives you kind of a good gauge that things are going as expected.
Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about some of the less critical things, like we just mentioned, the only thing to set it forget is like your stand, your tank, your bulkhead, and not much else, right? So while you're at it, double check your float valves, double check your float switches, and your electrodes, particular pH. But once a year, or just whenever I'm down there, I'll take my float valve and just flip it back and forth a few times, make sure it's clear. They never give me a problem. And your float switches, man, if they fail internally, that's one thing. But like on a long enough timeline, you're going to get enough buildup to where that thing is not going to rise and fall with the water level accurately. And that's just like the simplest way to avoid auto top off, just drowning your tank in fresh water. They're also super easy to replace. You can get 5 packs of them for like $3 on eBay. Maybe you don't want to get the super cheapest one, but no matter what kind of top off you have, except maybe the optical ones, just pull that thing out, put it in a light acid solution, or just mechanically scrub it down, and then you'll have the peace of mind that is one less thing that can fail in your aquarium. My reef aquarium experience is less about nurturing corals and keeping the conditions proper for their growth, than spending an inordinate amount of time avoiding mistakes and disasters. And that's why I don't use controllers. It's my one controller job for this session.
The only way I maintain my float switches is, so I hate salt creep, right? And I've got like one of those Nalgene little rinse bottles or flush bottles.
Wash bottle,
okay. And it's filled with RO water, and wiping the salt creep that's on like horizontal surfaces is one thing, but it builds up inside your sump on different little odd edges and stuff, and I'll just squirt RO water on it, which sort of breaks it down and redissolves it.
Absolutely.
But I always do my float switches too, right? I'll hose them down with some RO water, kind of jiggle them up and down, and that
absolutely,
because usually the only problem I have with them, unless you've got like a snail problem in your sump, but mostly it's just salt creep. I don't really get a lot of calcification.
Right at the air-water interface. Right. That's exactly where you expect salt creep to build up.
Yep.
That's the exact kind of space. And one way you might be able to reduce that to some degree is putting a lid on your sump, or keeping it in a really humid section so that we can't evaporate and create that salt buildup in the first place. So that's smart. if you want to use a machine and not gravity to top off your stuff. So yeah, I mean, I feel like some of the stuff is common sense, but it also needs to be said.
Yeah.
And then, I think it's less critical for pH electrodes to be, cleaned, replaced, and
Bad
recalibrated.
at cleaning and calibrating those. That's like my
Yeah.
my flaw. But then I don't really
So
care about pH as much as other people, so maybe that's why.
if you're just monitoring the pH in your aquarium, much less critical. If you're using it to auto drive your calcium reactor,
Yeah.
that's a lot more important. But one thing that I've done in the past is, I use a really good HANA Bluetooth pH probe. And if I'm running a pH monitor on a particular tank, I don't have to pull it out every time. If I have a pH probe that I know is calibrated properly, I stick it in the tank, and they're like 0.01, with close to each other. I'm like, okay, we're good for another 6 months. So you don't necessarily follow manufacturer's advice that you really need to replace them every 6 months to a year. If I pull out a second probe to compare it to, and they're like right there, then you're good. But you definitely want to clean it. Right? It's also going to develop a biofilm. It's in live water, so it's going to develop some incrustation if it's inside your tank, and it'll get covered with some kind of mineral dust inside your calcium reactor. So yeah, I mean, anything that isn't your tank or stand or bulkhead needs to be cleaned.
I'm actually writing it down so I remember to do that next time. Because I haven't touched mine in ages.
All right, while you're doing that, I want to talk about detritus. Detritus. Sanjay famously didn't clean his sump for 5 or 10 years or something, and with mixed results. But detritus builds up in your sump. Just siphon it out. It builds up within your rocks. And from a wee lad, I remember it was one article by Julian Sprung where he talked about using a power head to create like intermittent storms in your tank. Just get in there and just kind of blast stuff out. Make sure it's ejected. In your sand, I think the solution is not to have sand in the first place. And your overflow
Disagree.
box. That's fine. That's also personal preference.
Yeah.
But it also is going to build up in your overflow box. That's one people forget a lot of times. But having a bunch of detritus, it is biologically active, right? It is basically, 50% just pure microbes. And it's the equivalent of having a big fish. If you take all that detritus and put it together, it's all biologically active, which means that it's respiring, it's breathing, it's producing CO2. You want to raise your pH? Start by removing your detritus, because that's all just stuff that's breaking down, that's just feeding bacteria and microbes. And having a ton of detritus, even in the bottom of your sump, it's all respiring. And it's all ejecting CO2, and it's all depressing your pH. You'd be really surprised. I see people doing the recirculating soda stuff to absorb CO2 from the air. Meanwhile, they're not addressing some of the really low-hanging fruit for CO2 production in your aquarium. So inside your rocks, I think people think about that. Siphoning your sand, I think people think about that. Siphoning your sump, we've seen some devices from VCA, specially designed for sucking that stuff up. But one thing that people always forget is their overflow boxes. Do you know how still it is at the bottom of your overflow box, especially if you have an internal overflow box? You don't even want to look. You don't even want to look at that overflow box, man. You know how funky it's going to be in there? That's all your water that passes through, and all the heavy bits, they're right there down at the bottom. So that's detritus. But while we're on the topic of overflow boxes, that is your refuge. That's a real, true refugium for vermitid snails, for sponges, for aptasia. I've talked to people who have gone to war on vermitid snails and aptasia, and they can't understand where it's coming from. I'm like, have you ever drained out your overflow box? Have you ever, looked in there? Aptasia can grow in the dark, right? Especially in overflow box, all that food coming through. Are you thinking about cleaning your overflow box? You got that look on your face right now.
No, I have a good story about that actually, because I'd say once in a while I'll get in there with a siphon hose and just siphon out the bottom of it, right? And it's always
Don't even have to
amazing
look.
what kind of crap.
Mhm.
But again, building my current tank, I intentionally put the overflow box in a corner because all these tanks with these middle overflow boxes, um, it's hard to see what's going on in there. And so I would blindly stick a big fat hose down there and clean it out. But clearly I was missing some spots, and this is a gross story. So when I set up the new tank, I hated that I couldn't get into that overflow. Like if a fish got in there, I was like, good luck. Um, but anyway, so I drain the tank, I move all the stuff into the new tank, and I scraped everything in that tank clean, and I gave it a good little bath and everything, and because I was gonna sell it. And then there was this putrid smell in my basement near the tank, and I was like, what the hell's going on? And I finally figured it out that there was just a patch of bristleworms still in that overflow box that had died, right? And that's an awful smell. And I finally had to disassemble all the plumbing and really, I climbed into the tank because the tank was empty and got in there with a shop vac. But it's just... yeah, it just was like, this is why I don't like overflows in the back center wall of the tank.
You don't have to get in there with a shop vac if you do it periodically.
Yeah.
And I'm literally talking 2 or 3 times a year, once a year. You don't have to diligently do it every time you do a water change. I think the problem is
I couldn't get the hose in every little nook and cranny because it was a very narrow overflow box, right? Whereas the new one, I can just walk around the side of the tank and I can see everything going on in that box, right? Which I personally prefer. Yeah, it takes up a lot of real estate, but yeah, it just went. So my face was going back to that putrid smell when you were talking about it.
You had a look.
I was like, oh man, that was terrible.
So one thing people always ask me is oh, I can't get into my overflow box. I can't really reach it. And I'm just like, you don't really need to reach it. You want to kill all the vermitids and Amptasia? You could fill it with fresh water. Suck it down, fill it with fresh water, and just whatever water comes out down into your sump, suck that out. Amptasia's tough. Amptasia's really hardy. Amptasia's not going to stand 15 to 20 minutes of pure fresh water. And then if you want to get the snails a little further, boom, we muriatic acid certain, our sumps. Not running, but attached. Mm-hmm. Just drain the water out, fill it with fresh water, put some acid in it, wait 10, 15 minutes, and then everything that, you used to scrub, now it's new, brand freaking new. So you don't even have to see inside your overflow box. You can drain out the seawater, try to get as much of the detritus as possible out, then refill it with fresh water with a little bit of acid. Acid is not inherently toxic, right? Acids and bases is not inherently toxic. A little bit going back in your tank is going to depress your pH. It's not going to kill everything, no matter what kind of acid it is. And, you have a few sections to go down, so you can, fill it with acid, a little bit of acidified fresh water that is going to dissolve the vermitids who try to lock themselves up when you fill it with fresh water. And bada bing, bada boom, that's one less thing you can cross off as far as a potential refugium source of Amptasia, sponges, and vermitids. So yeah, I think that was a really important one to talk about because out of sight, out of mind.
Super easy to forget. I'll be the first to admit, I don't care too much about detritus. I do clean it up when I go in for a manual water change, right? I'm not. I'll gravel vac. I'll clean the overflow box. I'll siphon out the sump. But especially if you're growing macroalgae in your sump, it's gonna have all kinds of critters developing. Rockwork's another one that I think people, the whole idea of growing coralline algae on rock is that, turf algae then has a much harder time growing somewhere where something living is already growing, right? But the problem with detritus and rockwork is it creates little soily areas for those type of algae to take root, right? Mm-hmm. So I always think that, if you have good flow on your rockwork or you base them out during your water changes, it helps in terms of continuing to stimulate that coralline growth and also not creating these little nutritious pockets for turf algae to take root.
One thing I wanted to mention is a trick that I've kind of developed over the last few years. So as a wee lad, Julian put the bug in my head to use power heads for creating storms that really flushes out your rock work. But if you have a really full tank, that detritus can go all over the place. So one thing that I've taken to doing, once my tanks reach about 2 years, there's going to be a lot more buildup. Like the first year, you're coasting, man, you're fine. But after about 2 years, there's enough life and there's enough buildup and corals and everything to generate enough detritus that's going to get stuck in certain places that just won't reach. And I've turned to turning the entire tank into a protein skimmer. I have a very large air pump, and I will insert a few, or at least one large air stone underneath one side of the rockwork, then the other side of the rockwork. Man, those bubbles, they go through Pukani style rock, really porous rock, and they lift up everything, right? You're not exactly skimming, but you are literally lifting. Like you've seen, if you have enough dinoflagellates or cyanobacteria, they'll capture air and they'll float to the top. So I'll just use like this heavy, air storm inside the tank. And this is like, you never know when you need it. It's not a thing that you can point to and look, but if you haven't done it for like a year, that cyano is going to keep coming back, that algae is going to keep coming back. But using the air storm method to really just get through the rocks in a way that water flow is just not going to do it as well. Oh my God, that is how I polish my rockscape. And I would say I do that about once a year. Not every tank needs it. Right? Some of my tanks are like 50% lace rock with like virtually no porosity, plus some tonga branch. There's just not the kind of pores that are going to trap that stuff. But some of the man-made rocks where people have just gone a little too far as like increasing porosity, sometimes that backfires and traps a lot of detritus. And the air storm method just lifts everything up to the overflow, and then it goes right down into a filter sock, even a nylon filter sock, or the automatic filter roll. And oh my Lord, the corals love it. They absolutely love it. You do it once, and then something about just really reducing whatever's stuck to them. It gives them just kind of it's like a bubble bath in reverse. I guess that is a bubble bath. But you'd be surprised how much it lifts up, and a diligent 2, 3, 4 hour air storm once a year in certain aquascapes is just going to remove just the kind of detritus that's going to lead to buildup, that's going to cause some kind of full tank syndrome, old tank syndrome symptoms. So that's a funny little hack that I haven't talked about too much.
What's your take on, I've seen some folks, they'll throw an air stone in front of their return pump and then put that on a timer and then turn that on every, just briefly.
I do it once a year, once.
Yeah.
Doing it every day, all the time, I don't know if that's the answer.
Yeah.
Right? But I do remember the micro scrubbing nano bubbles,
yeah.
which I always thought was like just the stupidest name. Is it micro or is it nano? Like which one? Pick one. The words mean something. So this is more like just a maintenance, a periodic thing, not like an everyday thing. But I found, again, after about a tank is 1.5 to 2 years old, it generates enough detritus that's the only technique I've found that will reliably eject a lot of detritus from the aquarium. I think we have a couple more points to make, but that's just overarching. Anything with a moving part is prone to wear and tear and eventual failure, and you need to know that in your bones. This is not a guess. This is a fact of life, so we've talked about some of the most critical things, but I like to rinse off my Biomedia. I take my Biomedia out of whatever tank, fresh or salt water. I take it straight to the sink and I hose it down, and I got a strong pressure washer. If freshwater killed saltwater bacteria, we'd all be washing our hands with salt water to get rid of parasites, right? If that osmotic pressure was so detrimental, that's what we would be doing, but we don't. So I hose my Biomedia in just normal tap water.
I've always done that with my freshwater tanks. Like this whole
not scalding
rinse it
hot.
In your old water in a bucket. I'm like, screw that.
I did
just
that.
Run it under a sink, man.
I did that. I totally was that guy. And
Yeah.
then at some point I was just like, I thought about it, the thought experiment. I was like, nah, the fresh water is not going to nuke my bacteria, because otherwise we would be using saltwater sterilized freshwater stuff and freshwater
Well, even
sterilized saltwater stuff.
I mean, I guess everyone's mileage might vary, but I just never, a little bit of chlorinated tap water coming out of the sink was never really the end game for, nitrifying bacteria. I mean,
Hmm.
is there an impact? I'm sure, but it's, your
It's
sponge
better
will
than
get back to
letting the
normal.
biofilm suffocate itself,
Yeah.
right? A long enough timeline, something that's incredibly porous is going to choke. The biofilm is just going to build up, and there's going to be no oxygenation or water flow to those pores where bacteria are. So rinse off your biomedia. It's super simple, and I don't even do that often. Like once a year, again, every couple of years, or twice a year, just whenever I'm at there, and it's accessible. And I'll do the same thing to my freshwater saltwater tank. Just hose it down in the sink.
Blow out your
ca-
lights with a compressed air can.
Yep. Less critical. Some of the newer fixtures, the Hydras, the Radions have that removable little kind of intake screen. Makes it really easy to actually pull that thing off and just really give a good cleaning. The Red Sea Reef lead is super good. You can literally pop the top off, and just all you see is fan and heat sink, so you can really clean that up. And I'm inclined, right? So I will disassemble my Radions, get in there, and that's it. This is really like your mileage may vary depending on how dusty or how many pets you have in your house, as far as like pet dander and fur getting into your stuff. So you gotta have to take that. Again, that's one of those things. If you kept it in a clean room, you would never have to clean it. You would never have to clean off that dust. But at least the intake, that's a really easy thing. Compressed air. I'd rather have people blow the air through and have that dust, go into your tank or go around, than to never do it, right? But yeah, the probably number one cause of LED light failure is that fan breaking, and then your light is not broken, it just won't turn on because it's going to get too hot, and that's not really a big deal. Calcium reactors, we talked about the float switches, because that's what I use. I use the Deltec Twin Tech for that purpose, and I just like it to be cleaned. If it was more accessible, I would clean my calcium reactor, more often and top it off more often. It's easy to be like, oh, whatever, I can get out, a year or two if you have a giant calcium reactor and lower demands. But keeping that calcium reactor media tumbled, and just like cleaned from film and the dust and the insolubles and invariably are ejected, it's going to increase your dissolution rate regardless of pH, right? Keep that stuff clean.
I never topped off my calcium reactor. I always, when I hit like a halfway mark, I would just empty it and then kind of get all the mud out and then salvage what I could and then refill. For
me, it's about 2/3.
Yeah, 2/3.
So I feel it's half, right? Because you can't fill it all the way. So my calcium reactor main reaction chamber is probably filled like 3/4, right? So when I lose 1/3 of the actual media, so I'm down to 2/3, that's when I'll clean it. Well, what I'll notice is just like the protein skimmer, I'll start turning it up, and I'll turn it up, and I'll turn it up, and I hit a certain threshold. I'm like, all right, it's time to clean this. And then I'll refill it with media, and I have to turn it down because it dissolves so much better. And I would say, the larger your calcium reactor is, the longer you can get away with that. But if you have a small calcium reactor, and depending on your mineral demands, you might be, want to get into that thing twice a year.
Yeah,
or more
I
often.
never ran mine with a doser. I always just used a needle valve, but I just experienced less clogging of that needle valve if I got rid of the mud, on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and again, the easier you make it to remove that thing and clean it, the better, right? And that's, I mean, it's a better topic for the end, but choose your gear based on maintenance too, right? Like, and plan the install in a way that you can maintain it. I can't emphasize that enough. I see people's tanks, and that also goes back to when you buy stuff, right? When you start to tag on an ozone reactor and now you've got a UV sterilizer, now you've got a Trident. All that crap needs maintenance, right? And factor the true cost of ownership into your decision of like, do I want a Trident? If I want that Trident to make decisions on my dosing, then now I got to maintain the hell out of that trident, because if something goes off with that guy, there could be, or your calcium reactor, whatever.
One thing that
you know,
I thought was shady about the Trident is you had to read the fine print that Neptune Systems recommends sending back the unit every 18 months for refurbishing at a fee of like $100, $150. That's when it was launched, so I don't know how much things have changed. But how many people do you think that got some of the first Tridents have already done that? Because it's been 2 years,
they
right?
have like a maintenance kit for it right now, or is that one of the
I don't know, but
auto
do you
testers?
think 100% of the first wave Tridents have been refurbished either by the user or by the company? Right?
Again, it goes back to me, like, the less crap running on your tank, the less excuse you have about being lazy, and just keep that stuff clean. I don't.
Amen, brother.
I
Amen.
hate, having to maintain more things. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So
So I have a couple more things I'm going to throw out there. Plastic is not waterproof. Just going to let that sink in for a second. Plastic is water impermeable. It's not the same as waterproof. It's not like glass. So in a long enough timeline, water penetrates plastic. Our pumps, our return pumps, they're not potted in plastic. They're potted in epoxy, right? And so with that in mind, on a long enough timeline, water permeates plastic, so every single one of your algae magnets or magnetic mounts needs to be inspected. That is the silliest reasons to have problems with your tank. Is you got a cheap algae magnet or algae scraper or magnetic rack or magnetic mounting pump or pump mount, and you don't inspect it, because I don't know that I've ever had a magnet last forever, right? I think we talked about this not too long ago, where I was just randomly looking at something and I was like, oh my God, that magnet is like corroded as AF. It was so corroded. So that is one thing that I also keep in mind now is, keep a look on all those magnets, because I mean, that is filled with some pretty intense metals, not just neodymium. It's a mix. And if your magnet is ruptured, or the encasement of the magnet is ruptured, that is the same thing as like poisoning your reef tank. That's just a silly reason to just go back to the Stone Age with your reef tank, because some $5-10 algae magnet or magnetic frag rack just ruptured on you.
can I just say that one of
You can
the
just say whatever you want.
accidental one of the unintended benefits of having a 4-inch rim above the water with my tank, I mean, we talked about this, my water level is about 4 inches lower than the top of the rimless, which, is different than, say, your standard tanks, which are usually like 1 to 2 inches. One of the benefits I've picked up on is I can clean the glass, and then I just move my magnet above the water. It's still on the glass, right? It's still ready to go.
Yep.
One, I don't have to worry about the long-term exposure of the plastic housing to the water. But the other thing is, like, it doesn't give time for hitchhikers to, or for fan worms and things with thick calcareous little skeletons to grow on it, right? Not skeletons, but tubes, whatever you want to call it. So, eventually you're just like the back wall in your tank, just like your power heads, your magnets become like little pieces of live rock. And that's another way that you scratch your tank, right? So keeping it above the water, like, they stay spotless and clean, nothing grows on them, and they're not exposed to water. And then when it's time to clean, I just submerge it. So I think more people should do that to their tanks. It's just have a nice 4-inch rim. It's great.
Yeah, get your tank to be an extra 4 inches of glass, just so you can pull out that algae magnet out of the water and then it won't get encrusted. But no, that's a good point. And I think I just have a couple more things. This is something that's a little bit newer to me because it's newer to the hobby, is taking apart your diaphragm valves on your continuous siphon drains. Kind of like the reverse of the protein skimmer, you keep raising it up. On the diaphragm valve, I was noticing that I just kept opening it up, trying to get like that perfect sweet spot.
I'm talking about the Red Sea ones?
Red Sea, water box, Cade, they have a diaphragm valve. I think the Cade might be a gate valve. But just any of those things. Even your ball valves and your unions, like dig them apart once in a while. Make sure that, actuate them so that, they're not totally like encrusted closed when you need them. But the diaphragm valve, I think it was on the Red Sea and the water box. I just kept opening and opening and opening, and it wasn't like giving me the fine grain controls that it had on day one. And I remember we took apart the Red Sea one, and there was just like one loose ball sponge. One loose big old ball sponge, because I have like these little, not quite golf ball, like marble size
Yeah.
sponges that grow all over the place, and there was just one loose one in there, and I'm sure it was just like kind of bouncing around. But man, it was like that's all the water passing through it for years. The biofilm, the plastic of the diaphragm valve wasn't really encrusted, but the biofilm was real. That was real. And man, sure enough, we took them apart. And they have little knobbies. You take them apart and pull off the nuts or the screws or whatever. We cleaned it up, and all of a sudden, boom, we were back to like that fine grain control, very similar to a protein skimmer. And then we're really able to fine tune the continuous siphon drain to be really silent. And the thing is, before it got bad, we could readjust it. It would get silent, and then it needed readjusting, well, in like a couple of weeks, right? But you have a brand new one and a brand new tank. You adjust that thing once, man, you are good for like 6 months. You're good for like half a year.
Yeah.
And so that is one of those little things. It's not as critical because we're just talking about noise. But as far as like the Reef Aquarium user experience, man, just clean that out. And so we started touching upon cleaning out the tubing. This is not the kind of thing that you're going to have to really be mindful of for a while. But there are a lot of different options for pipe brushes on like semi-flexible metal coil. I don't know how else to describe it. You can get them 6 feet long. 6 feet long. I don't know how critical it is on the return. I don't know how critical it is on the drain, but just for that added peace of mind on certain tanks that I know have a lot of biofouling, we just shove those things down there. I actually recently did this on my external overflows on my Innovative Marine Nuvo EXTs. I was having a little bit of a challenge balancing out each of the ones because I got 4 tanks and continuous siphon drains. I just noticed they weren't really all on the same level, so I took a stiff, long bristle brush. Dude, I got this thing at Petco. It was a kit of like 4 or 5 bristle brushes, from very short and thin and stiff to kind of like long and large and soft. Just shoved it down there a few times, and all of a sudden, just made getting that continuous siphon drain to be steady and balanced so much easier.
Yeah, I remember reading in, I think it was Delbeek and Julian's book, they were talking about these cool like bullets that go through the plumbing and clean them out. Sort of like how a bank, when you go through a drive-through bank kind of thing. But that's something that I thought about, long term, is just a buildup of like calcifying organisms inside your pipes, and how do you, keep that clean, especially if you have a lot of 90 degrees and stuff. I think at some point a bristle brush may not even keep up, right? Because it's calcified.
Dude, I'm a big fan of that muriatic acid. I would put a cap on the end of the drain, and I would put fresh water down there with a little bit of acid and just let that do its work. We're talking about 3-5-year-old reef tanks with like a bunch of funk in there. But it's again, on a long enough timeline, it will become a problem, right? Vermitids could just live in there, right? If you have a vermitid problem, like boom, there's your refugium source right there. And man, you acidify that water 10-15 minutes and let it drain into one chamber of your sump that you can suck out. Done. Problem solved. You're good for another 3 to 5, depending on your tank.
Yeah, and I think if you have unions in the right places so that you don't have to go fishing too deep, you can kind of get in there too in key areas and do some cleaning. I
think the last thing I want to mention is measuring tools. Don't take anything for granted. Your thermometer, your refractometer, your pipetter, if you're cool enough to be using a pipetter because you're testing water so often, all that stuff needs to be recalibrated, or at least, check it against, some other known reference. Then that's one of those things you don't have to do it very often, every 2, 3, 5 years, depending on how much you use it. But salinity is paramount, temperature is absolute. You have to get those dialed in, and you don't want your tank to be drifting too high or too low for any of those parameters. And it's just simple things to just like kind of get your head around once for, I don't know, 30 minutes, an hour maximum, as far as like how to do it. And then once you've done it, you can revisit that every 24 months and you're good to go. Yeah.
Yeah, the final thing I guess I'll just say, and I've said it before, but I guess to me it's a big deal, is if there's some of these random things that you rarely do, and this discussion popped them in your head, those are the kind of things that I just put in my calendar or in a reminder app. And so once a year, like let's say calibrating your refractometer, right? I randomly, like when I'm having a moment where I think about something like that and I do it, I immediately think, okay, when am I going to do this next? And then I just pick a random reoccurring time frame and I punch it into my smartphone and it'll pop up. And it may not do it the day it pops up, right? But at least now it's nagging me like, oh man, this Saturday morning, I'll get that done, right? I'll finally take that skimmer out and clean it up. And I'm the kind of guy that like forgets to grab my kid at the school bus unless my phone tells me, go get your kid right now, right? I'm just a space cadet. So, but if it's in my phone and it's punching up and telling me to do something, then I'm good. Like I'll stay on top of things. And
find a system that works for you.
Yeah.
So Mark's got his notifications on his phone. I've got annual or kind of quarterly cadence. Because we have so many tanks here, I do have like a master spreadsheet where we check off all the things. So yeah, just find something that works for you. And what's really cool about this topic is it falls right in the slipstream of what we were talking about last week. When you're not doing things to your tank, that's a perfect time to get in the maintenance done. When you're not working with corals or growing this or installing that or tweaking the spectrum of the dosing, and you've got that stuff kind of coasting, boom, that's a time to, if your tank is mature and older enough, to follow up on some of this maintenance that is going to give you better performance, better stability, and most of all, like greater peace of mind. If anyone who's listening or watching this right now has any tips or ideas or feedback, I think, you and I have collectively learned a lot from the generations of aquarists that came before us. And I'm sure there's a lot of tips and tricks and things to maintain that we may not have even thought about. So go ahead and put those down in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you're listening to the podcast, I don't know, maybe go find the YouTube video so you can, add us with some of your ideas.
yeah, I'd love to know other suggestions. It's like when you brought up the pH probe, I was like, damn it, I got to go do that, So I'm sure there's stuff that I'm not thinking of that I could add to my checklist.
I thought about talking about RO and stuff, but I feel like that's kind of
changing out the carbon sediment blocks. Yeah.
Well, no, people know that, but just double checking your TDS meter, back flushing your membrane. Like I said, I used to be an RO junkie and had the mechanical one on there. So there's like a lot of kind of satellite maintenance related to maintaining aquarium, like cleaning your saltwater mixing vat and the pump that runs it once in a while. And I'm sure we didn't cover every single thing, but aquarium maintenance is my jam. And we spent an inordinate amount of time keeping things in peak operating condition in order to avoid any kind of problems.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the issues that arise mysteriously, like old tank syndrome, are abated if you have a bit of a schedule on these things, and if you do have a disaster, it ends up being a minor one versus a major one. So and it feels good. I don't know, I mean, is it a pain in the butt to pour your skimmer out of your sump and water gets everywhere and you got to clean it? And yeah, it's a pain, but once you pop it back in and it's running, you just feel good. It's like you just got a new coral. You're like excited,
I got a great follow-up to that. If you never do it, it's painful. Like going to the dentist. right? If you're not used to going through the motions, if you're not used to pulling up a tray and figuring out, the exact or an ideal set of movements in order to remove the skimmer or remove the pump without making that mess, and not using too much elbow grease by, using some smart techniques like acid, then it's painful. But when you do it more
It's true.
often, you go to the dentist more often, there's a lot less work for them to do. And same thing with your tank. And like you said, man, I get about as much joy of like a brand new super clean skimmer as I do like, an exotic coral that I got for the first time. It's really fun, and it's a way to do something with your tank without messing with the program of your tank, especially protein skimmer cleaning.
Yeah,
Oh my God,
lets
that
you
is so
play with
satisfying.
your tank instead of sitting on a forum for 6 hours reading stuff. Go clean
Second
some
guessing
stuff.
everything you thought you knew.
Yeah, exactly. Just go clean some stuff.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I think this was a really cool topic, and a long time coming. I know we've had this on our docket for a while, so I hope you guys got a lot out of it. We're really looking forward to Reefstock in Denver, first weekend of March. Go to reefstock.show for more information. Mark and I are going to be doing a live session of reef therapy in Atlanta at the Aquatic Expo first weekend of April. Looking forward to seeing you, buddy, and seeing your reef tank. Maybe we'll do
Yeah.
maybe we
Guess I
should do a
gotta.
live session at your house, just you and I personally, just talking about your tank, separate from the Aquatic Expo one. But it's going to really be cool to interface in real life with real reefers, not digitally, and really going into the deep end of reef and aquarium discussion and conversation. So, Mark, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this very important session of reef therapy. If you know someone who's got a nasty reef tank, share this podcast, share this video with them. They can listen to it while they work on their reef tank. I love it. It's so meta. Make sure to, I guess rate us or something on your favorite podcaster. Give us a like on YouTube. Comment if you have any questions. And we'll see you guys next week if we don't see you at some of these upcoming reef shows. So until next time.
Until next time.
All right. Later, Mark.
Later.